Spider-Man Hostile Takeover, Chapter 26. Many blocks down, two men stood inside a darkened Fisk warehouse. No one else was there. That had been a condition for the meeting. Just the two of them. No assistants or bodyguards. No witnesses.
"We'll do it at one of my places," Fisk said. "It's harder for you to arrange things without being seen."
"And if someone happens to notice me going in there," Norman Osborn asked,
"then it's simply a consultation between the mayor of New York and one of its most prominent citizens. Nothing could be less scandalous."
A table had been placed under a hanging light. On it sat a bottle of wine with two glasses, but neither seemed in the mood to sit, let alone drink. Fisk watched the shadows dance in the dim light. He was as good as his word. None of his people were present. He had no wish for them to hear what he had to say. And it wasn't as though the mayor was a physical threat. If he needed to, he could break Osborn in half, stuff him in a crate, and drop him into the river. All in less time than Osborn would need to call a cab. No, the dangers Osborn posed were of a slower and more methodical nature. He was dangerous, but he also presented an opportunity. Fisk didn't trust the mayor to honor a bargain, but he trusted Osborn's greed and ambition. He trusted Osborn's lust for power. Most people saw him as the brilliant entrepreneur who had turned a little tech company into one of the world's most ubiquitous brands. They saw the ambitious man who had achieved incredible success and wealth, wanted to prove he could govern as well as he could invent and innovate. The jury was still out on how well Osborn was doing as mayor. The financial sector loved him because they saw him as good for business. But did that translate to being a good leader? He was getting heat from a lot of interests that didn't benefit from Wall Street's success. Guys like Martin Lee were on the news every other day, talking about providing services for the homeless, and implicitly attacking Osborn in the process.
"Someone has to step up," Lee liked to say.
"If the government won't help the people, then the people have to help each other."
"You have to make Martin Lee and his kind work for you," Fisk said. "Make use of the private sector. It's good for business and it's good for the people."
He paused, then added,
"I'm trying to give you a lifeline, Osborn."
"I don't need a lifeline," the mayor said.
"Not from you or anyone else."
"I'm not drowning."
"You're not exactly thriving either. People with money love you, but everyone else is calling you the mayor of Wall Street. You can't change who you are. That would be worse. Your base will turn on you, and the people hate a hypocrite. Instead, you have to convince them that your ways will help everyone. And embracing Wilson Fisk will do that."
Osborn coughed out loud.
"Precisely."
"Sounds like a non-starter to me," Osborn said.
"The world hasn't forgotten about your past troubles. The state had a chance to make its case against me," Fisk said. "It had no case to make. Am I supposed to be punished for that? That's not justice."
"We're not talking about justice," Osborn told him. "We're talking about public relations."
Fisk smirked. "This isn't some uptight Lutheran town in the Midwest, Norman. It's New York City. And if there's one thing New Yorkers like, it's a comeback. They want to see a man who's been down get back up again. They want to see a villain remake himself as a hero. If you can become a part of that, then you become a hero too."
Osborne kept his face expressionless. I'll consider your proposal. You are doing more than considering it, or we wouldn't be having this conversation, Fisk said. Tell me what it's going to take to make this work. Osborne sighed and shook his head. Fair enough. He handed Fisk an envelope. There's a list of requirements in there. Nothing that should be too painful. Fisk tore it open, took out the paper, and scanned the contents in the dim light. I have to hand it to you, Osborne. You've planned it precisely. If I shave off this much, it will hurt without the wounds being crippling. He looked up and gave the mayor a curt nod. But if this is what you want, I think we can do business. Just trying to do what's best for the city, Wilson. I have an opportunity to make some real changes. I could be hailed as the most successful mayor in generations, but I need to play handball if I'm going to succeed. Not to mix metaphors, Fisk said. But are you sure you want to play handball when you're skating on such thin ice? We're doing business here, Wilson. Is that kind of talk really necessary? I merely remind you of where you stand, Fisk replied. He held up the documents. As long as we're discussing a carrot, I won't need to show you the stick. Osborne's eyes narrowed. You said we're doing business. His mouth became a thin line. And I want to keep doing business just as amicably, Fisk said. What you ask for is reasonable for a man in your position. I have no objections when I deal with a reasonable man. I only require that you remain reasonable. I'm glad to know that you're thinking so clearly on this. I always think clearly. Oh, really? Osborne laughed. What about this man who's running and pretending to be Spider-Man? No, I don't have any evidence, but I know how you think. What I want to know is how you found someone who can do exactly what Spider-Man can do. If I were behind it, Fisk said, I certainly wouldn't discuss it with you. Still, I'm curious, Osborne continued. Are there others out there like him? Is there a whole race of Spider-Man waiting to be recruited? Or did you somehow create him? Is there a laboratory in the bowels of Fisk Tower where ordinary men are being? Enough! Fisk barked, taking a step forward. Don't speak to me like I'm one of your lackeys you mock with your superior tone. I am Wilson Fisk. And I am the mayor of New York City, Osborne replied. But he did so quietly, and with his eyes lowered. If you want to stay that way, you will govern your tongue, Fisk told him. The pounding in his skull began to soothe. His pulse stopped thrumming. He let his fist unclench. It is human nature to resist the feeling of powerlessness. You can indulge in that fantasy when you play at being a politician. When you speak to me, however, you will remember who and what you are, or I will have you replaced with someone who understands where the city's power truly lies. We have these negotiations because you are an intelligent man who might see things others have missed, not because you are an authority to assert. Fisk continued to stare at him until Osborne looked away. We're done here, Fisk said. He turned and strode out of the warehouse, leaving Osborne to find his own way in the dark. Bingham crouched on a pile of crates, watching the exchange. Wishing he had popcorn to munch on, or potato chips. He liked those too. It would be hard to eat in his suit, though, It got hot in there, but he liked the feeling like he was cooking, slowly turning into his true self. He also liked watching these two men talk. It didn't get more entertaining than this. He waited for a signal, a sign that he should jump in. If he needed to take care of business, he would do it. And it would be another high-profile Spider-Man crime. But Bingham knew it was unlikely he'd have to act. These two men in the same boat. Even if they didn't want to admit it, they would stare and threaten and have pissing contests. But it was never going to be more than that, because Fisk needed Osborn, and Osborn needed Fisk. That's how it was, and it would stay that way until one devoured the other. The fat man left first, and there was nothing for Bingham to do. Maybe swing around a little, web up some cops for fun, knock over some old ladies, and get his face on the news. He loved swinging. He loved using the web shooters, even though they exacted a heavy toll on his shoulders. He was sore for a long while after flying around the city. The web shooters they made for him had a much stronger kick than the ones the imposter used, and they were clunkier too. It wasn't fair. They told him that it was his muscle and skeletal structure that hadn't been enhanced by the medicine. His shoulder would be dislocated every time he used the web shooters. The pain was worth it, though. Any pain was worth it, because he was Spider-Man. And greatness and suffering were part of the same thing, weren't they? He thought so. Or maybe he heard of it on TV. But either way, it was true, and he loved being himself. He loved swinging through the city, hurting people, scaring them. The other day, while pretending to be the weak Spider-Man imposter, he considered pushing a baby stroller in front of the speeding truck. Babies were easily replaced, there being no real harm done. And Bingham knew he'd feel no more guilt than if he dropped a candy wrapper on the street. He held back, though, because he knew the grief he'd get from Fisk was more trouble than it was worth. The time would come, though, when no one would tell him what to do. Fisk thought he had control, but that was a joke. He controlled Fisk. He pulled Fisk's strings. It was better for now that the fat man didn't know it, though. Let them think he was stupid. People had always underestimated him. They laughed at him back in Binghamton, and they laughed at him on the streets of New York. But they'd stopped laughing after he met the people from the laboratory. The nice lady he met on the street took him to a van where they gave him hot chocolate. The kind with little marshmallows that melted while you poked them with a plastic stick. They gave him clean clothes to wear and a tuna sandwich that was unlike any tuna sandwich he'd ever had before. It was thick with creamy tuna salad, and it had little black olives in it, which surprised him, but he liked them. "We'd like to take you someplace," the lady told him. She was pretty, and he liked looking at her. "You'll be warm all the time, and you'll have plenty to eat and drink. There will be clean clothes and a bed." People thought Bingham was stupid, but he wasn't stupid. No one did nice stuff like this without wanting something in return. He understood that. "What will I have to do?" She smiled, appreciating how smart he was. She had funny glasses that were very long rectangles with bright green frames. He didn't know how he felt about those. "We want to test some medicines," she explained. "They might make you healthier than you are right now. But I'll tell you the truth. They might make you sick. But if you were to get sick, we'd take care of you." Bingham could picture himself lying in bed, the pretty lady with the funny glasses taking his temperature, or bringing him bowls of soup on a tray the way his mother had before she changed. His mother had given him medicine that made him feel better and let him watch TV as much as he wanted. That didn't seem so bad to him. He would be willing to do that. So he signed the papers that said he would agree to do what they asked. And the pretty lady told the man in front of the van to drive. It took a long time to get where they were going, and Bingham couldn't tell much about it because the van had no windows. The van stopped, and they climbed out inside a garage that was probably underground. It was cold, and his footsteps echoed. The pretty lady with the glasses walked him through some doors and handed him over to a man in a uniform who did not smile at all. Bingham never saw the pretty lady with the glasses again. He thought they were going to a house, just like the house he grew up in, only nicer, with softer beds and prettier furniture, soup bowls that weren't chipped, and forks with all the tines pointing in the same direction. It wasn't like that at all. It was more like the hospital where they brought his mother when she came back sick. He hadn't thought that they were talking about him being sick like his mom, but that was exactly what the pretty lady meant. They meant sick like his mother, and worse. He didn't even have his own room. He shared it with 5 other men, but not always the same 5, because things kept happening to the others. They would get sick. Sometimes they became feverish and thrashed in their beds. Sometimes they threw up, soupy liquid, or blood, or, one time, what seemed to be the man's own stomach. They grew lumps on their faces and bodies. They screamed and cried for their mothers. They soiled themselves in the night, and Bingham found them lying open-eyed and still in the morning. One man clawed his own face while the others watched. No one brought them soup. They did have television, which was nice. They were supposed to be nice to each other. They were security guards, and it was their job to step in when someone else stole another person's pudding cup, or hogged the TV, or was just mean because they liked being mean. Zane was mean because he liked being mean. Most of the men were quiet and minded their own business, the way Bingham tried to, but Zane was mean from the beginning. He liked to trip the other patients or yank down their pajama pants just because he thought it was funny to see someone's butt. He stole food and threw it at people, and he would take the TV remote and not give it back because he said there was nothing as good on TV as watching the babies cry when they didn't get their way. Zane said Bingham was fat, though he knew he had lost a lot of weight since leaving home, and he was losing more now. They didn't get much to eat, and he thought the medicines was making him thinner. Sometimes he liked to say, "I'm slim," to people, but not to Zane, because Zane would make fun of him. Most of the security guards would step in if Zane took things too far. Not at first, because that would mean putting down their phones or their magazines or whatever they were using to pass the time. Eventually, though, they would do something. Not McGregor. He was kind of old and kind of lazy. He had a shiny bald head with a fringe of gray and a strangely round nose with a big red growth on it. His eyes were weirdly tiny, and he laughed when they hurt themselves. McGregor liked Zane. At first, he only laughed when Zane was being mean, like he was watching a funny movie. But then he started to help. The two of them would play catch with a TV remote, or Zane would hand McGregor someone's dinner tray, and the guard would dump it in the toilet. Then there was the business with Reese. He was close to being Bingham's friend. He didn't make a lot of friends, but Reese was really nice to him, and so Bingham tried being nice back. They sometimes talk about things they remember from the old days, or they would sit quietly and watch TV together. It seemed like they could do that for hours and not get bored. One day Reese started choking. They hadn't been eating anything, so at first Bingham thought it was a cough, but it kept getting worse. Reese hacked and wheezed and fell over. His face turned red, and he clawed at his throat. There was an emergency call button, and McGregor stood, his finger on the button, but he didn't press it. He just stood and watched, grinning the whole time. Bingham decided he would press the button if McGregor wouldn't, but Zane wouldn't let him. He held Bingham and McGregor stood and watched while Reese twitched on the floor for a long, long time. Then, the twitching became weaker, and Reese lay still, his mouth open, his eyes glassy, a stain appearing on the floor beneath him. McGregor pushed the button. "Seizure in room 7, he said in a clipped voice. The minute he took his finger off the button, he and Zane broke out in laughter. They high-fived, like they just watched their favorite team score. It was after they took Reese's body away that Bingham came to realize that he was different. He wasn't exactly who he used to be. It wasn't like he was growing, or like part of the old Bingham was gone, and someone else had appeared in its place. It was part old and part new. That's how it seemed to him. His body was changing, but it was still his body. He thought things he never thought before, but they were still his thoughts. There was probably a word for when this happened, but he didn't know it. Later that day, when Zane asked him if he was going to cry for his boyfriend, Bingham took him by the hair and smashed his face into the floor until there really wasn't a whole lot left of Zane's head. It broke, and the stuff that had been inside was everywhere. McGregor pressed the button really fast that time, but he wasn't breathing either by the time the staff got there. They took Bingham to the director's office. The director worked for the boss, who was a very important man. No one wanted to upset the director, and they especially didn't want to upset the boss. Bingham had done both. And while he didn't love living in the facility, he wasn't sure he was ready to go back outside where it was cold and there wasn't enough to eat. Now that Zane and McGregor were gone, things wouldn't be so bad. It didn't seem right somehow that the very thing that would make his whole life more bearable would be the thing that got him cast out. The director was an older man with a long nose and a white beard. He looked very serious, but not exactly angry. There were some questions at first about whether or not Bingham understood what he'd done was wrong, but the man didn't really seem to care very much about the answers. He was much more interested about whether or not Bingham had ever hurt anyone before. If he had intended to hurt Zane and McGregor, and if he had known he could do the things he did. The director wrote down everything Bingham said in response to these questions. Being listened to was a strange feeling. Bingham discovered that he liked it. "Have you been feeling any different lately?" the director wanted to know. "Stronger, maybe." "I feel good," Bingham said. "More awake, I guess. Like, I know everything that's going on. I didn't know that I felt stronger until that thing happened." "But you felt stronger when you attacked those men." "Yeah," Bingham said. "Am I in trouble?" "No, not in trouble," the director said. "Not if you're willing to help us." How can I help you?
By taking more medicine, the director said.
It doesn't make me sick, so okay.
The boss will be very pleased to hear that, the director said.
It turned out that Bingham wasn't punished for what he had done to those two men. Instead, they gave him his own room. He had a TV that he controlled by himself, and no one tried to take his food away.